Good morning, everybody. Your Grace, Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya, the bishops and other clergy, I'm really privileged and honored to be presenting to you today. I was really excited when I received this invitation, which I felt really compelled to accept, because we hold the church in very high esteem in terms of the role that it plays, particularly in promoting good governance in this country. I think the history of the church in terms of what it has done, in terms of ensuring that there's good governance, protection of human rights, is well written in this country and well etched. And that is why for us as Transparency International Kenya, and I'm sure the same for other colleagues in civil society, really hold the church in a very special place when it comes to the promotion of good governance in this country, including the fight against corruption. I had done some slides. I don't know that we'll be able to screen them here, but all the same, okay, great. Thank you very much. So I don't have to keep looking at my screen. So I just prepared some slides to try and demonstrate and illustrate where we are as a country in the fight against corruption, where things stand as we go into another election, and what we need to do to ensure that going forward, and particularly using this election, that it becomes a vehicle to ensure that there's leadership of integrity as enshrined in our Constitution. And we also know what the Bible says in terms of service, leadership, and what is expected of people who are entrusted to lead. So in terms of the status of corruption right now, and I'm sure I've had many of you also speak to concerns around corruption at the national level, at the county level, we know, and this is not just from us, but even the government's own admission, and none less by the president as well, that we are losing an estimated 30% of the annual budget to corruption. I think this has been a statistic that has been shared over the last 10 years, 30% of our annual budget. So you shudder to think that if our budget right now is more than 3 trillion, what are we losing at the end of the day? The president, you remember, was it last year, said that we are losing about 2 billion. I wouldn't even say losing. We are bleeding 2 billion shillings per day almost to corruption. Yeah. The other statistic that is important to note is there are various cases under investigation, under review, and in court right now, which are yet to be resolved. Some even going back to 30 years. We all remember the Golden Bag case. Yeah, that has never really been fully resolved. No one has never really fully answered for that particular scandal. And then we've had Anglo-leasing, and many others have followed since then, which are still pending in our courts. But other than that, we also know that a lot of our current serving leaders, people who are elected in the last election of 2017, and some who are appointed with the administration that came into office after the 2017 election, have been implicated in these corruption cases. It's at the national level, at the county level. Some have been asked by the courts to stay away from their offices pending the hearing and determination of their cases. We know them. Some have been impeached. Some have even been convicted but are appealing those cases. So we have a number of them. And we already know, even yesterday, if you watch the news, a number of them have been cleared by our political parties to vie again in this coming election. Now, in 2017, as civil society, we ran a campaign called the Red Card Campaign, where we called for the disqualification of individuals. I'll not call them leaders, because sometimes you call them leaders and you see what they've been implicated in. It almost sounds like an oxymoron. So let's call them individuals. These individuals had been implicated in various cases, and we did a list of 20, just 20, But there were many others who we didn't list, who had been implicated in corruption. Their cases were either in court, and for some, the court had earlier even declared that they were unfit to hold public office. Some were being investigated, and we asked the relevant institutions, please don't clear these people. Don't give them another ticket to go into office and stick their fingers into the cookie jar. That didn't happen. Most of them actually were cleared. And when you look at that list of 20 that we presented, and then there was also a list by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission of 106 names that was also presented by AACC and submitted to IEBC, you find that all those names are the same ones now in court, not for the cases that we listed them for in 2017, but new cases, because they got opportunity to go into those county offices, to go into those national offices, to make decisions that ensured that more resources were stolen from Kenyans. So now they're facing even new cases. If you look at the cases faced by the two former governors of Nairobi, the former governor of Kiambu, the governor of Migori, there are many, there are several of them. And unfortunately, we have seen that some of these individuals still intend to vie for office and have been given tickets by some political parties or are being considered for nomination. We have asked these political parties that they need to act as a first sieve. Before those names are given to IEBC and other institutions, political parties must be the gatekeepers and ensure that whoever they are processing, those persons that they are processing for public office, are actually people that are clean, that have not been caught in breach of Chapter 6. Because where we stand right now, we are concerned that Chapter 6 of our Constitution on leadership and integrity is complied to more in terms of, is adhered to rather more in terms of breach rather than compliance. So that is a key concern, particularly as we go into the next election. Which people are being presented to the public for consideration for public office? Related to this is that our corruption cases really take too long in the pipeline, whether it is under investigation, under review, or in court, and particularly in court. We have been monitoring a number of corruption cases for the last few years, and we have an online database where we invite citizens, journalists, and other stakeholders to visit and just look at the current cases in court and how they are moving, or the cases that have already been decided and how they are proceeding in the courts. And we found that the court cases generally take an average of 5 years to be heard and to be determined. That's actually an improvement, because previously they would take more than 7 years. And we've seen I've mentioned some of them like Anglo Leasing and others. By the time it gets to a point where there are no even witnesses, or even people who have been charged have unfortunately, since long departed, and so that makes those cases, move very slowly. Magistrates or judges are moved, and so there are the other complications that come into play. So there's something that we also are trying to agitate around: how long should a corruption case take? We're trying to push that they should really take less than 2 years. If we can hear election petitions in less than 6 months, what are some of those active case management practices that we can put in place to ensure that these corruption cases also move very fast within the pipeline, from investigation to review by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and then to be heard and determined, so that we are also able to recover what has been stolen to corruption. In terms of where we sit among the League of Nations, we as Transparency International global movement annually look at the status of corruption around the world, and we have what we call the Corruption Perception Index. And in the last index of 2021, we found that we actually scored Kenya at 30 out of 100. On a scale of 0 to 100, 0 means very corrupt, and 100 means clean. Of course, very few countries get to 100, but there are some who do get to the 90s, like the likes of Denmark, Netherlands, Switzerland, New Zealand, and others. But for Kenya, this has generally been where we have been stationed in the last 10 years, if I was to compare how we have moved in that particular index. In 2020, we had scored, actually it's not 30 but 31, and in 2019 we had a score of 28. So in the last 10 years, I would say we have oscillated between 25 and 31 points. So some little movement, maybe by 3 points if I compare the worst score we have registered since 2012 to where we are now. And we also attribute that some of those, maybe the improvement in score in some of the years, because we also have to acknowledge what is being done right. That is important so that we can continue to encourage our institutions responsible for the fight against corruption to continue on a path where we're able to see some progress. We acknowledge that there have been laws, legislations that have been enacted in regard to corruption. We have a challenge in terms of their implementation, like we've talked about the leadership and integrity law as defined by the Chapter 6 of the Constitution. So there are some laws that have come into place. I think there are some commitments also that the government has signed up to when you look at what the government is doing under the Open Government Partnership, trying to ensure that there's access to information and trying to really open up even procurement processes. You know, there's been a little progress and we just need to keep pushing the government and other relevant agencies to continue on that right track. When you even look at the recovery of assets, there's also been a bit of improvement where now we are seeing reports from AACC, from the Asset Recovery Agency, that they've been able to recover, you know, resources that have been stolen previously, especially, you know, large tracts of land, buildings, and so on, that are now coming back to government ownership and which had been, you know, had been grabbed by individuals previously. So there's something at least that we can say, something is happening, but it's still not at that pace that, you know, we expect, given the many commitments we have made and given the provisions that we have in our Constitution and in various statutes and legislation. I also just wanted to emphasize that even as we look at the score where we sit in the League of Nations, we're still below the sub-Saharan average. So when you compare with other African countries, we're still below because the average of Africa is 33 and the global average is at 43. So we're still below average when it comes to our efforts against corruption. If we can move to the next slide, I think I just wanted to share, as I said, there have been various cases, if you think about the corruption scandals that have colored particularly these last 10 years, the administration in this last 10 years, and that is why as we look forward to another administration, there are certain things I think that as stakeholders we need to watch and demand, particularly in the fight against corruption. So I just highlighted some of them. You remember when the president tabled that list of shame in Parliament in 2015. Unfortunately, if you look at that list, there are various cases that are still pending. Several people were asked to step aside. Those cases are still pending. Some of them are pending in court. Some of them were thrown out of court on technical grounds. We, of course, had the two NYS cases. We had the issue with the dams, the issues in the energy sector. Yeah, there have been several, sports and so on. So there are many, several cases. Just wanted to illustrate the extent of corruption. I think the other thing that is important to connect as we go into the elections in regard to corruption is where we are also as an economy. There have been concerns in regard to the high cost of living, the escalating costs of basic commodities. I think many of us, ladies as well, we are now really watching how things in the kitchen are being used. Yo mafuta unaangalia, you want to ensure that it's being used in the right way because it's almost gone up by five times when you look at how much, say, a 2 liter or a 1 liter, you know, a jerry can or bottle of oil is retailing at compared to what we were spending less than 2 years ago. When you look at the cost of milk, I was so shocked the other day when I went to the shops and bought a packet of milk for 65 shillings, you know. Bread as well, now retailing at 60 bob, almost doubled in the last 10 years. So there are many issues Kenyans are grappling with. So even those who could live, say, on 100, we have this common term, you know, those who live on less than $1 a day. How much can $1 buy now in Kenya? A packet of milk and a loaf of bread? Certainly not. So there are those concerns. And of course, with that also high taxation. We saw the concerns last week, even with the availability of fuel. But even with those issues, we're still seeing continued wastage and stealing. It's not like the cases of corruption are going down. So you have to link those. Where we are, what role has corruption played in terms of where we are now as a country and looking at where we stand as an economy. There are concerns around the debt levels as well. I think currently standing at about 8 trillion more, and also concerns that by the time we are borrowing this money, is it already designed to be stolen? That by the time we are coming up with some of these projects and budgeting for them, what amount of corruption is actually budgeted and sanctioned and approved by Parliament in those budgets, such that then it becomes very difficult to track, because it's actually approved and legitimized. We are normalizing corruption when you look at how it's happening now, So there are concerns around how much we are borrowing, what we're using that money for, because as much as we appreciate the many projects that have come, if you just come out on this road, given that it has even affected how we are coming into this building, you can see what's happening. Those are good projects, but at what cost for Kenyans? How long will we pay for these projects? And is all this money that is being spent on these projects being used rightfully? How much are we losing to corruption, And how does corruption, in terms of how debt, how loans are used, impact our cost of living and how we live, our standards of living as Kenyans? I think I just also wanted to highlight one of the other cases that we've really grappled with in the last 2 years, because even when Kenya was at its knees, because we know we're one of the most affected countries in regard to COVID-19, the impact that COVID-19 has had on this country, looking at the number of infections, the number of people that we have lost to COVID-19, people are still stealing. It's what we'd call the most egregious form of corruption. That when we're in a crisis as a country, we're in an emergency, a humanitarian crisis, a socio-economic crisis, a health crisis, and people still ensure that that money is not all going to be used for what it is intended for, in terms of creating some form of relief for Kenyans. We saw what happened to some of the PPEs that had been bought. Some of them are actually still lying at the KEMSA stores, So we bought a lot of them. They have not even been used because they were bought at inflated costs, and our counties, which were supposed to buy from KEMSA, are not able to afford them. So that was a whole crisis as well. But even with all the concerns that were raised, I saw a lot of religious leaders also pronouncing themselves to concerns around this corruption during the COVID-19 relief and response efforts. We are yet to get anyone punished for it. No one has been charged in court. Of course, because no one has been charged in court, no one has been convicted. And so our concerns remained unanswered because no one has been held accountable for the theft of COVID-19 resources during a time when we as a country were literally on our knees. I wanted to also just talk about what our constitution and our laws say about leadership in this country. I think I've already talked slightly in regard to Chapter 6 of the Constitution and leadership and integrity, but we know that the Constitution provides for the national values and principles of governance in Article 10 of the Constitution. And for the first time, because it's something that we really worked hard for, we have the Constitution devoting an entire chapter on leadership and integrity. If we look at many constitutions around the world, that's not the case. But we actually have strong provisions on leadership and integrity articulated in our Constitution for the first time, because this was a departure from the previous Constitution, which did not even talk about corruption. We actually have something on leadership and integrity. And even if we had a lot of issues in terms of pushing for that particular provision, those who were involved in the constitutional review and development process will recall that when this chapter came before politicians, they were very reluctant. And that is why the laws that have come out of this chapter are very weak, adulterated. When the law of leadership and integrity came to be debated in Parliament in 2011, there was a lot of a lot of adulteration because they were not willing to be held accountable. And that is why we have so many problems in regard to people who have been charged with corruption and they continue to hold office because there's no clear mechanism for their removal from office. And that is one thing that the politicians ensured, You know, that yes, you'll have your chapter 6, yes, you'll have your law on leadership and integrity, but no, these politicians will not be easy to hedge out, even if they are accused and charged and convicted of corruption. Because right now we have people who have been convicted of corruption, but they're still in parliament, isn't it? They're still in parliament. They're the ones who, if someone is supposed to be answerable, if you go to the Public Accounts Committee, or if you go to other committees which are supposed to ensure oversight over the use of resources, you will go and defend your institution or position in front of those same people. So how do you continue to oversight on behalf of citizens, continue to legislate, continue to hold institutions accountable, and yet you yourself have been convicted of corruption? It is such an oxymoron, it's such a paradox. And the other thing I also remember when we were pushing for that, the provisions on leadership and integrity, because it was a much larger chapter. It's actually one of the smallest chapters, if you have noticed, very small chapter. One could be one of the smallest in the Constitution. It's because the politicians deleted a lot of the sections. They said, you know what, these issues on corruption are not going to be with us for a long time. We just need a few provisions. In a few years, we'll clear this problem of corruption. So we don't need all these provisions, you know, on corruption. Hii si kitu ambayo itatusumbua kwa wakati mrefu. You know, we'll clear with it, and so we don't need so much you don't need to legislate so much in terms of what needs to happen in terms of corruption, because it's only a temporary solution. That was more than 10 years ago when we were debating the Constitution. Look at where we are now. We are dealing with even bigger issues, because looking at the number of people in office who have been accused of corruption. I think those were just some provisions on leadership integrity. I just shared some newspaper cuttings in terms of the, you know, where we feel that some of our agencies that are responsible are speaking from both sides of the mouth. Because on one hand, they're saying this is impossible, we cannot stop politicians who have been accused of corruption. On the other hand, they're saying, okay, we will try and ensure that people, I think if you go to the next slide, people who have been accused of corruption, you know, here you can see there was a story just a few weeks ago. There's a plan to lock out graft suspects from polls. There were concerns last week that there will be no charges against governors or MPs or politicians before the elections. So there are a lot of challenges, even institutionally, in terms of how our institutions that are supposed to help Kenyans out of this quagmire, you know, what are they doing? Because we were in this same situation in 2017, and it looks like even in 2022, we are going to be in a similar situation with even more people who have been accused of corruption. So also just wanted to share as TI what we're doing in terms of the fight against corruption, and also probably try and start that conversation in terms of how do we work with the church to try and ensure that there's a sense of morals, you know, and integrity in regard to the people who are given responsibility for leadership in this country. So one of the things we are doing, we are currently looking at various cases and reports of corruption, reports published by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission and other accountability agencies, and just see who have been listed for corruption and who have been taken to court, who are being investigated, and we're going to do another list to now advocate that these people should not be cleared, but also take this list very actively to wananchi, you know that this person has a case before them, they're answering a case, and you should actually not elect them. Because ultimately, when all else fails, if our political parties, as you can see, are giving tickets to people who have been accused of corruption, our agencies have said there's really little that they can do. It's going to be a tall order to block these people from vying for office. If all these institutions fail, then it's ultimately upon citizens, and that is where we feel that the church also comes in terms of how do we educate, empower citizens as well to make the right decisions and say no to people who have been accused of corruption. Part of that work is research and analysis, because we have our work has to be grounded on facts. We don't want to accuse anyone wrongly, so that is why we are really looking at the court cases, which we have been tracking for years, and also the reports. What are they saying, who has been accused or charged and convicted, and so on. We are also involved in public interest litigation. Actually, this morning we are just going to be filing a case to try and see how we can compel the relevant institutions to ensure that these people are not cleared, but also ensure that have also the court pronounce itself on what happens to people who have already been legally removed from office through various processes, like impeachment. There are people who have been impeached, by the Senate, but they're still giving intention that they want to vie for office. There are people who have been asked by the court, directed by the High Court, to stay away from office until their cases are cleared, but they still want to vie. So what is the point of all this legal process if they're going to be cleared? So we want the court also to pronounce itself. Then what if we can't clear all these others who are still, under investigation, or people who have just been freshly charged? What about those people that the court has already pronounced they should stay away from office? What about those people who have been removed from processes like impeachment? Do we still clear them, or should they just be declared that they are disqualified from office until, they're proven, for those ones who are still whose cases are still pending, until they're proven innocent? So public interest litigation has been quite important for us. The other aspect, and this is where we also see the church coming in strongly, is public vetting, and I've already intimated on that we are going to prepare these lists, give Kenyans that information in terms of Chapter 6, who has been caught in breach of Chapter 6, but also work actively with community groups. We are trying to work with churches as well to bring citizens together to hold vetting sessions. Call these candidates, people who have been clear, who are vying for office, call them and have dialogues with them, not just about, of course, interrogate whether they fit into that description of leadership and integrity as prescribed by the Constitution, but also interrogate what is the agenda, whether it's at the ward level or the constituency or the county level and so on. So we are actively holding and working with community groups and churches to have these social vetting sessions so that there's that engagement at the lower level and citizens are really empowered to know, because really these people are our servants. We pay them. It's not the other way around, but I think in Kenya it's an inverted situation where they are the big guys, we do what they want to do, but yet we are the ones who pay them. So why do we elect them and let them go scot-free without calling them back, holding them accountable, analyzing and assessing their performance? So we want to put in place a system where even after the elections, before the elections, let Kenyans interview these individuals and interview them against various criteria, including leadership and integrity and their ability to deliver. But then even after the elections, let Kenyans continue to have platforms whereby they can continue to hold them to account. You promised to do ABCD. We've heard that in Nairobi, ulipatikana you were caught in a fight, or you have been accused of theft, you have been accused of misappropriating or embezzling CDF funds. Give us the answers, let Kenyans demand answers directly from them. So those platforms for continued engagement between leaders and citizens is also very critical, because for us to be able to ensure that we achieve socioeconomic development, we must ensure that that dialogue between citizens and leaders is there, beyond the election. So that is what we're trying to put in place, and we see the church also playing a very significant role here, because you are the one, the church has, links and direct engagement with citizens. I think if it's one thing that Kenyans listen to, and when we've done our opinion polls, time in, time out, we have found when we ask, which institutions do you trust? You find that the church is held in high esteem by Kenyans, and we believe that if we're going to push these issues around integrity, I think we have our champions right here, in terms of church leaders who can then be able to appeal to the hearts and souls of citizens that the right thing must be done, and this is what we need to do to ensure that we hold our leadership accountable. Of course, on all this, we have to ensure that we are communicating very publicly and ensuring that there's visibility for the campaign, and so these are some of the things that we'll be doing. I just wanted also to share that last year we got, not last year, but in the last election, we got very special opportunity to work very closely with the church. So I was just sharing some of those pictures, and I've got some publications as well in the church magazines and some of the church media as well. So we really hope that's a kind of partnership that we can continue to have. This was just a commercial break. Just looking at where Chapter 6 stands and our institutions, and where we are right now in terms of people being cleared to vie for office. Yeah. So the AACC is standing there tall, trying to scare away the corrupt, but there's another institution saying, it's okay, don't worry, you'll be cleared. Because that's really it's almost a situation right now. But we're also trying to appeal to our institutions to speak from one voice, be on the same page. And I think it's also something that the church can assist us, appealing to these institutions that they must do the bold thing. They must do the right thing for Kenyans. Because as we speak now, whenever we talk about it, we are told, oh, this is impossible. The law says this. We can't move because of the law. But this is a situation now because we are not willing to take that bold, action. We are not acting with conviction. That is how we end up very, very easily, going to serve these hyenas. As you can see, many of them have been accused of graft, hate speech, tribal, the issues around, related to hate speech is the tribalism and as well. So that is a key concern. We can move to the next slide. I think the other concern we have as well in regard to elections and corruption is the issue of campaign financing. Where is this money that is being used in the campaigns? Where is it coming from? We have seen obscene amounts of money being poured on the ground. Simona, these people come over the weekend, the next thing you hear that people outside, just next to your churches, are fighting, communities are fighting for money that has apparently been left for communities for empowerment. They now call it empowerment. It's not called handouts anymore. Inaitwa empowerment, ya mama mboga, ya boda boda. Yeah, a lot of those fights are because of money. And even when you ask, how much money is it? Ya kuuza nafsi yako. It's not much money, it's just 50 bob. We are there having citizens fighting for 50 shillings a piece. 50 bob. The other day I went to my home in Western Kenya and found there was a shortage of 50 bob. 50 bob ziko happy, wanasiasa wako nazo. Utapata wakati watakuja ground, pengine ngojea Sunday, utapata 50 bobs circulating. But for now, during the week, there's no 50 bob because it's been held by politicians. Wanangojea kwenda ground on Sunday, that's what they are issuing. 50, but what can 50 bob buy? You've just realized, hata paketi ya maziwa haiwezi nunua. Maziwa is 65 or 60 bob if you're lucky. You can't even buy a packet of milk or even salt. At least previously it could buy salt. What can it buy? So our Kenyans are selling their souls for nothing. And we're not asking where this money is coming from. And we always tell them that this money, that 50 bob, it looks so small. And you can't even do anything with it. But the impact of it is that when this person gets elected, all those 50 bobs they have been giving in the ward or in the constituency, they will want it back. And that is why we never see development. Because your pesa CDF, your pesa Award Development Fund, all that money, they will find a way to recover the money. Because if you ask yourself, how much are these politicians paid? Yeah? If it's an MP, is it about 500, 600,000? So if someone is going to spend 50 million in the campaign, is it money that they're going to recover in 5 years during their tenure in office? So how will they recover their money? Because this money has to be recovered. So we're trying to appeal to citizens. Question the use of big money in the campaigns. All these choppers flying above and causing so much noise in the environment. Wanapata pesa wapi ya kulipia hizi choppers, So we are trying to sensitize Kenyans because right now we have a problem where Parliament for many years refused to pass regulations to enact what we have as the election campaign financing law. It was enacted in 2013. But in 2013, of course, that was after the elections. It was said that it will be operationalized in 2017 when regulations can be considered. Come 2017, the operationalization of that law was deferred to 2022. And come 2022, they said they gave technical grounds as a reason why they didn't pass regulations for the campaign financing and also some limits. IBC had attempted to put some limits in terms of how much can be raised and how much can be spent by politicians, on what items, how much can you spend on media, how much can you spend on transport based on your locality. But all that was rejected by Parliament. In fact, it's almost immoral because it's actually more than 13, how many years now? It's 12 years since we have promulgated the Constitution. When you look at Article 88, it clearly requires that campaign funding must be regulated. So you then ask yourself, are we then holding our elections within the ethical and constitutional framework that our Constitution desired if we can't regulate campaign funding? And every time These regulations come up for discussions, wanasiasa wanasema ya kwamba tuhairishe, let it be considered in the next election. In which election will it then finally be considered? Because now maybe we are looking at 2027. 2027, I can tell you, it will be another bunch of monkeys there. They will say, 2020, 2032. So when will we ever implement campaign funding, regulate campaign funding? Last week, there was some amendments that were passed in Parliament on campaign funding, which actually remove the requirement for MPs not just MPs, sorry, but politicians, candidates, to publicly disclose how much they're raising for the campaigns and how much they're spending. And without that public disclosure, that's the whole essence of limiting, of regulating campaign funding. You want to ensure that politicians are accountable for how much they are raising for the campaigns and what are they spending this money on, Because without this disclosure, then there's no regulation. So what has been passed by Parliament as amendments to the campaign funding law is that we remove the disclosure, public disclosure, so we don't have to disclose how much is being raised and how much is being spent and what is actually being spent on. But we know that's where the concerns really lie. As I asked, where is this money coming from? A lot of this money, as I said, it's either coming from proceeds of corruption and crime, money laundering, acts of terrorism, and other kinds of crime. That is a reality. The other source is public resources, and there's been a key concern that for the first time we have an unprecedented situation in this country where we have two leading coalitions with access to power and resources. We have seen public spaces, residences which are funded by taxpayers being used for the campaigns and political engagements, We have we've seen government vehicles being used in the campaigns, government officers, instead of providing services. They're not in the offices, kuhakikisha ya kwamba huduma kwa wananchi inatolewa, they're on the field. So what happens to citizens? Are they getting services at this point? We've seen police having to be deployed on the ground because of the early campaigns. It's not even official campaign season yet, campaign period. And because of that, because now they have to deploy extra security, because again, you've seen, people are fighting because of those little monies, and there are all these vurugu on the ground. Police have to be alert, and we are having more police having to be deployed in political activities. What does that mean for Kenyans in terms of security? So we have to question, what does the use of public resources in the campaigns mean in terms of access to services? And especially at this time, when Kenyans are struggling with the high cost of living, and not able to get sufficient resources when you look at health, water, education, and so on. But it is these same officers who are being deployed in the campaign. And as I said, it's a concern because previously, most of the time, we've only had to deal and call out one side, stop using public resources. Now it is two sides, We have the incumbent deputy president. He has a claim to incumbency because he has still access to those resources. You have the president who's supporting the opposition leader. That is still access to power and resources. Then you also have people at the county level, sitting governors who are looking at another term in office, and also governors who are leaving office but still have their candidates. Nowadays everyone has their candidate, and you'll do everything to ensure that your candidate gets that position. So lots of people with access to public resources, and that is one of the reasons why what we have done is we have come up with a portal, where we're encouraging citizens to give us evidence, information, pictures, where they have seen resources being used, because previously we have complained about this issue, but our respective agencies have said that without evidence they can't move forward. So now we're trying to give evidence so that this issue around use of public resources is actually dealt with very decisively this time round. So we then see us using we actually see no use of resources, public resources in the campaigns. Because we need those resources. We've just detailed how we're struggling with debt, high cost of living. We really need that money elsewhere and not out in the campaigns, promoting one particular agenda. And I think the other aspect around lack of regulation in the use of campaign money is also the unequal playing field that it creates, particularly for young people and women. I think it's exciting now to see the number of women and young people that have come out through some of these nomination processes. But I think there could have even been more people, more young people, more women, more deserving Kenyans. Let me call them clean Kenyans. The thing is, clean Kenyans don't have a clear pathway to office. It's very difficult for them. And if you listen to the stories of these young people who have made it through the nomination process, it has been a very rough ride. It hasn't been easy, because they don't have those resources to be able to campaign, and compete with others who are more wealthier and who have access to proceeds of crime, proceeds of corruption, and are deploying it in the campaign. And it's one of the things that we're also trying to educate citizens on. Someone who is going to represent you well doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's very wealthy. Let us listen equally also to people, young people, women, young men, people with persons with disability as well. These are the people who hurt the most when we don't regulate campaign funding, because they don't have access to this kind of resources. So it's important that we give this message out to Kenyans. One of the other things we're also asking Kenyans is, as you vet, because we're doing the vetting on integrity and also their capacity to be able to deliver as leaders, but also asking questions of, can you also disclose to us, where are you getting, what is the source of your campaign funding? We're asking them, ask them these questions. We're encouraging aspirants to also share information publicly, even if we don't have the regulations in place, but can they do it out of their own self-initiative? Just publish that information, because for us, if you're going to be guarding resources, you're going to be oversighting public resources, that accountability has to start now by you being able to tell us what are the sources of your campaign funding. So we're also asking citizens, ask them those questions when they come to you to campaign. Hiyo pesa ya chopa umetoa wapi? Hii 50 bob unaturushia umetoa wapi? So that there's some that level of accountability. But I just wanted, and I think I've already reiterated and across the presentation on what we think the church can do is, of course, one, condemn corruption and the corrupt. We've seen this happening already, but we want it to be the clarion call. You have, as I said, access to majority of Kenyans. Almost every Kenyan, has an association with a church, a mosque, or a religious entity. And we believe that here religious leaders can help a lot in terms of push the button, rather, in regard to fighting corruption. So condemning corruption and the corrupt, because currently what we see, and if you listened to the arguments by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution last week when they said that they can't prosecute politicians during this time, because they said that prosecution gives them undue visibility or undue advantage. And I asked myself, wow, where are we as Kenyans that if someone has been accused of stealing, tunaambiwa kwamba huyu mtu ameiba pesa, and then all of a sudden that person is not someone that you're stigmatizing. It's someone you're holding in very high esteem. Because that's what they're saying, that Kenyans, Kenyans hold these people in very high esteem. They call them, these are our thieves. Hata kama wameiba, huyu ni mwizi wetu. That is a problem. It's a big problem we have in this country, and we have to change that narrative and that image. A thief is a thief. Whether he has stolen big money or small money or a chicken or 5 billion shillings, it is a thief, and we must condemn those acts of corruption, and we must stigmatize those people so that Kenyans can now actually say, let us now just by our own will reject the corrupt. I think also that the church, as I said, creates a grand platform for continuous civic education. We have had a problem with civic education. I know maybe yesterday you may have spoken to AACC as well. I don't know that they also relate some of the challenges, particularly in terms of resources, and some of these resources are supposed to go to civic voter education. And we hold that voter education should be continuous. It should be part of civic education. It's not something, should not be an event that we only get into in an election year. It is something that should be continuous, throughout those 5 years of an electoral cycle. So we are asking the church to provide that platform for continuous civic education. And we've seen that happening already, but we wanted to just ensure that it is continuous, it doesn't stop. Because there's still a lot of people, especially young people who are voting for the first time, who still need that education. I've talked about our efforts towards bringing leaders and citizens together to conduct vetting, and we are asking that the church assists us in that, in terms of, even just giving us, could be simply as simple as giving us venues, promoting these vetting opportunities in terms of announcing them in your churches when they are within the locality. And beyond vetting, of course, is the performance monitoring. What happens when these people are elected? We need to have continuous platforms where these leaders are held to account and also held to, continue to demonstrate what they're doing in regard to their manifestos and promises that they have given to Kenyans, or how they're meeting the needs of Kenyans who have elected them. So we need that support from the church to provide, to help us provide those platforms. And then I've told you about the challenge we have, thank you. The challenge we are having in terms of campaign financing, and what we're doing currently also is we have deployed election monitors and working with partners as well to help us monitor these, give us these reports of public resources that have been used, and so on, so that we can be able to report these to institutions so that decisive action is taken. And we also believe that the church can help us as well in terms of that education. If the individuals also within the church who can also help us, who are based at the community level, help us with that monitoring, I think that will also be a way in which the church can help. But I would also be interested to hear also from you where you think the church, practical ways that the church and leaders can be able to support the fight against corruption overall, but particularly as we move towards this election, to ensure that this time we have a different crop of leaders, people who actually meet the constitutional requirements on leadership and integrity, and people who are moral as required by our Lord. Thank you.